Thanks everybody for turning up. It's really good to see such a great turnout actually, and I hope we can help you with some of the issues that you're having down in this area or about to have. I'm going to introduce Jamie to you. He's an integral part of Groundswell. He's been to Parliament with us several times, done a number of Zooms to various bodies, including the Environment Committee. He did our first tour around the South Island, so he's certainly been an integral part of Groundswell, and I did call him a nerd this afternoon, and he told me if I do that again he'll probably leave Groundswell, so I'm not calling him a nerd tonight. But he reads everything, and he's exceptionally good at it. He studies, and he's brilliant to talk to because he's got his finger on the pulse. So Jamie and his wife Linda worked 10 years in the 1990s on the family farm, an 800-hectare steep hill country sheep and beef farm in North Canterbury. They were among the first farmers in the country to have part of their farm classified as an SNA, and the first to win a case in the Environment Court that saw most of the SNA classification removed. Jamie has had 2 stints on Provincial Federated Farmers and 6 years as a district councillor. He qualified as a hearing commissioner and chaired the local council Environmental Services Committee for 3 years. Over the past 25 years, Jamie and Linda have grown their environmental consultancy, restoration and native plant nursery business with now over 300 farming clients in Canterbury and Marlborough. They have also 2 crews undertaking poplar and willow erosion plantings. He is currently chairman of North Canterbury-based Rural Advocacy Network, who partnered with Groundswell NZ to roll out our campaign. Jamie has developed an extensive knowledge on environment regulations and is passionate about sharing his knowledge to support other farmers. By the way, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Bryce McKenzie from Groundswell, one of the founders with Laurie Patterson. But please welcome Jamie McFadden.
Thank you, Bryce. I guess a couple of questions to start with. I tend to, how I present, I just tend to go with the flow. So if you've got questions as I go, then just stick your hand up. But just to get a bit of an idea around the room, how many of you are sheep and beef farmers? Dairy, is there much dairy around here? Probably, is it quite a lot from down Riverton end? Yep. Cropping, arable? There's a bit. Deer, any deer, much in the way of deer? Yeah, there's still quite a few deer down around here. Okay. In terms of I could talk about a lot of topics, but in terms of tonight, the main ones we were looking at were freshwater farm plans and Indigenous biodiversity. So if I was to ask you the question, what's your main interest? So for those that their main interest is freshwater farm plans? Yeah, and what about Indigenous biodiversity? Who's got a main interest in that one? Cool, okay. Well, that gives me a bit of a steer for tonight, but in terms of the outcomes from tonight's meeting, I've just listed 3, and these are what I'm sensing are outcomes. And the first is for you guys to understand how the new freshwater farm plans and the Indigenous biodiversity SNA laws work. So these are 2 new recent laws that have just been gazetted by the government, and how these impact farmers and what to expect. Okay, so that's the first outcome. The second one is understanding the reasoning behind Groundswell NZ campaign calling for all farmers to boycott freshwater farm plans and the significant natural area surveys. Okay. The third one is for farmers to have confidence that there is an advocacy voice that empowers and supports them in standing up against unworkable regulations and seeking alternative solutions. So I've just put those down as 3 outcomes from tonight's meeting. Occasionally I get asked why I do this. I mean, I'm a volunteer doing this. And the main reason why I do is, as Bryce mentioned, we've got 300 farming clients. We've been going 25 years. We've built very strong relationships and friendships with a lot of our farming clients. I'm still actively farming, a family farm still, my brother's on the family farm. And through those relationships with the farmers, the reason why I do this is, I guess, because I've got a lot of knowledge on it, but it just annoys the hell out of me, the way the farming sector in New Zealand are being treated. And I see even down here the huge amount of good work that is going on amongst farmers. And yes, we needed to lift our game, but gee, it's so under-recognised in terms of what New Zealand farmers are doing. And the amount of unworkable regulations, particularly in Canterbury, that we're dealing with, but I'm actually learning it's just as bad down here. There's a lot of unworkable stuff that we're dealing with, and I'll cover a bit of that tonight. But that's the main reason why I volunteer my time. And the second thing is that, and this, I guess, has come about from our experiences with the SNA issue, I'm a strong believer that people have a right to the full and accurate information about regulations that impact them, okay? So what you get from me is as it is. There's no sugarcoating. I tell you how it is and how I interpret the legislation. How many people have done some reading into the freshwater farm plans, like through your regional council or industry groups? How many have actually done a bit of reading in that space? Just a few. The reading that you get from your district, it's the same with your district councils with the SNAs and your regional councils with freshwater farm plans or any of these regulations. What you get from your councils is always in a certain way that it's presented to you. And there's nothing necessarily devious behind that. But you see, with your freshwater farm plans, the regional council is not going to tell you about the warts and everything else about these plans, because they're actually they're the meat and the sandwich that have to roll these plans out. And so they don't want to annoy all of their farmers by telling you exactly how it is, because there's a lot of warts with this freshwater farm plan legislation. The same goes with SNAs. Your district councils tend to be reluctant to tell you exactly how it is, because again, they need to roll this out. And so their messaging is always on the view that, we don't want to upset our people too much. So what that means, and what we've learnt and what we got caught out with in our district, is that we went into the SNA process in 1995 having no idea what we were going into. We allowed access for surveys. We were one of the first farmers in the country to allow access for surveys, and that was a massive mistake. We did not know the full implications, and now that I do know the full implications, we'll never allow surveys again until the legislation has changed. So I guess that's a bit of an introduction, and we'll go straight into the freshwater farm plans. So has everyone got a handout? Yep, probably everyone's got a handout there. So I'm just going to sort of use that as the basis. So the first thing with the freshwater farm plans is that every livestock or arable farmer over 20 hectares and horticulture over 5 must have a certified freshwater farm plan, okay? And that requires ongoing auditing. Every farmer in New Zealand, yep, over 20 hectares for horticulture, livestock or arable, and 5 for horticulture. You have 18 months from the date your area goes live to complete a certified farm plan. For some reason, and I don't know why, but the Aparima Catchment and Fiordland have been chosen by the government to be the first area to go live, and along with the Waipa Catchment in Waikato. And what that means by going live is the date is August the 1st, which is next week, and you'll have 18 months from that date to prepare a certified freshwater farm plan. Okay, and then once you've got your certified farm plan, you then have 12 months from that date of certification to have your first audit. And then you've got subsequent audits are based on your grade. So your farm plans are graded A to D. If you're an A, you have an audit 3 years' time. If you're a D, you have an audit 6 months' time. So that's basically the guts of the freshwater farm plans. The rest of Southland is 2024, but Aparima, you're August the 1st, next week. That's just the basic outline of the farm plans. I will be going into the next lot of bullet points, which is really just going through the pitfalls of this legislation and explaining it a lot more. But is there any questions around that sort of first broad introduction? Yeah, so I will cover that, but you have to pay for the preparation of your farm plan, you have to pay for the certification of your farm plan, you have to pay for the auditing of your farm plan. Yeah. Everything. Basically, the grades work like you've got certain outcomes that you have to meet. You've got to meet catchment outcomes, you've got to meet regulated outcomes, and then you've got to meet what's called supplementary outcomes. And those gradings are based on whether you meet all those outcomes. So basically, if you get a D, it's because you haven't met any of the regulated outcomes, okay, which means you haven't met any of the rules that are in place that relate to fresh water. You haven't met one of those rules. You've got to meet all of them. But if you fail to meet one of those rules that relate to fresh water, then you're graded a D. An A is basically you meet all the outcomes. Yeah. So an A is a pass, a B and a C, well, a B, I guess, is a pass with some minor, and then a D is definitely a fail. The question was, where are they getting the auditors from? Where are they going to get the certifiers from? I mean, who's going to want to certify a plan? When I go through and explain what's involved, who's going to want to be a certifier? So I work in the consultants space, and I've got a few mates and a sort of a network of consultants that I talk with throughout the country, from Auckland to Southland. And the discussion going around consultants that I'm certainly talking to is that this whole legislation is completely unworkable. No one wants to be a certifier. The auditor's probably not quite so bad, but no one wants to be a certifier, because you're basically going to have to write up a plan, a freshwater farm plan that is unworkable, it's impractical, it's bureaucratically heavy, so no one wants to be a certifier. There will be probably some of the bigger consultancy outfits will be lining up the certifier role, because I mean, it's money for jam. It is money for jam. You know, it's I do get annoyed in this space because I'm a consultant and I like to do stuff on the ground that works with farmers. I like to just get the 2 or 3 things that you need doing on your farm and focusing on the actions on the ground. And I see in Canterbury with our audited system and the whole compliance system, there's a massive waste of money, and a lot of it's at the expense of farmers, the costs. There are some fines, and I can't think offhand what the fine structure is, but there is infringements. Pardon? 1,800, yep. And that's for failing to complete a certified farm. If you don't have your paperwork, yeah. Yeah, okay. I might just, what I think I'll do is go through these next points relating to farm plans, because we're covering some of those points now, and then we'll come back to some more questions on the farm plans. So the first point there, this is on number 4 on your page, and I mentioned there one-size-fits-all tick-box approach with what goes into freshwater farm plans is extensively prescribed in the legislation. If you've got time and want to have a look at the legislation, it is extensive. And so your freshwater farm plans and what needs to be included. So this is just the maps. So this is just the maps, okay? This is not all the other stuff. But with your maps, you're talking about location of land units, surface freshwater bodies, artificial freshwater bodies, soils, landforms including slope. I wonder why they want you to include slope. But anyway, potential areas of intensive winter grazing and critical source areas, drainage systems and areas, planted riparian areas, fencing to exclude stock from freshwater bodies. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on, okay? So it's extensively prescribed. So you might have heard in the media certain politicians saying it's not a one-size-fits-all tick-box approach. I would challenge them to read the legislation and then tell me again that it's not a one-size-fits-all tick-box approach. Anyone that reads through all the legislation like I've done, there's only one conclusion you can get. It's extensively prescriptive, not just for farmers, but for certifiers, auditors, and regional councils. There's a lot of prescription in there. Yeah, it's one size fits all. The second thing is the lack of flexibility. to account for budgetary constraints and the constantly changing nature of farming from weather, natural events and fluctuating markets. And so a lot of my work with our clients, farming clients in Canterbury and Marlborough is, 12 months is a long time in a farming calendar, and there's a lot of things that can change. And our programs are constantly changing when we're working with farmers. And what this legislation doesn't do, it doesn't allow the flexibility for all of those changes that we're confronting all the time. And when we had the Kaikoura earthquakes, massive amount of damage, and we're still, 7 years later, our crews are still out there, like they're out there at the moment, trying to restore hillsides that have moved from the earthquakes in Kaikoura in 2016. So it's a constant, we've got new slips coming all the time. Like this winter's a shocker. A whole lot more new land has been slumping in our area because of the rains, and that's all old earthquake related, 2016 earthquake related. So there's not the flexibility there. The second point I mentioned there is a lack of clarity around people's privacy and private property information. Now, regional councils, there's requirements on the regional councils to keep records of farm plans, and that includes, and that again, it's prescribed in the legislation. There's a whole lot of things that they have to keep in relation to your farm information. What is not clear in the legislation is what is private property information and what isn't. And when I say that, like at the moment with a consent, who's in a consent process right now? Is anyone in a consent process at the moment? Yeah. So with a consent process, I mean, it's public information. If I want to look up a consent that's gone through, it's public information. And so with these farm plans, the regional councils can request a full copy of the farm plans, but again, it's not clear who can have access to that farm plan information and who can't, and what amount of information they can have access to. And I mean, this is pretty important when it comes to your own private property information, because we've had lots of experiences up in our neck of the woods. I think we've been quite unlucky in our area because we've been some of the first farmers that have been hit with everything. For some reason, they've decided to leave us alone this time and come down here in the Waikato. But, we got hit with SNAs, we got hit with the commissioners with our regional council and all of these freshwater, not the freshwater farm plans, but all of the freshwater regulations. So a lot of the freshwater regulations were first rolled out in Canterbury. And what we've seen through that in terms of your property information, so like with SNAs, and I will cover that briefly later, but with SNAs, what we did not realise was the extent of what other people, organisations could use our private property information. So we allowed that survey of our property, and then we were horrified to see that the organisation that we allowed to survey our property, which was the Department of Conservation, and the staff were actually really good on the ground, but then their lawyers from Department of Conservation used that information through the court to try and capture as much of our farm as possible as SNAs. And we had to fight to defend ourselves. So hence why we'll never allow our property information into the legislation. Here's another example in terms of your private property. Is that going in and out, is it? Can you still hear all right, though? Yep. That one? Yep. So here's just another example. Through our work with farmers, we've been doing applications for funding through the regional council and also the district council. So we draw up a proposal for funding. Quite a lot of the ones with the regional council were around wetlands, so restoring wetlands. What I found out at a certain point was that other people within the regional council, policy and planning people, were using that information that we submitted and using it to define where wetlands were on private land in relation to their regulatory responsibilities. And I submitted that information on behalf of our clients as an application for funding. The abuse of private property information is shocking in amongst councils, and some councils are a lot worse than others. The system needs a complete overhaul, and we need some protocols and legislation that looks after, just respects our private property interests. I mean, it's just a bit of common sense, really, and a bit of respect. That's not there at the moment, and that's very unclear around these freshwater farm plans. This is a biggie, this next point. Freshwater farm plans must meet all existing regulations, so all existing rules, including unworkable rules, that relate to freshwater. And you'll see my comment I've put there that thousands of farmers will face a certified plan they cannot physically or financially implement or comply with. Now, if you look at our Canterbury example, each region's got slightly different rules. You've got your national rules. If we're talking about stock exclusion rules, like stock access to waterways, there's your national rules, and then all of the councils must meet those national rules, but they can go stricter than the national rules. So our Regional Council Environment Canterbury has gone stricter, and what they've got there, and this is just one example, so there's about 180 rules in our Land and Water Regional Plan. About 150 of them relate to farming, and I've gone through those rules and understood which ones farmers are complying with and which ones they aren't. And there's quite a few that they aren't complying with. And it's not because farmers are being bad or destroying the environment. It's just because the rules are unworkable. Or there's rules there that they're completely unaware of. I mean, I was talking to a farmer before, completely unaware of the rules. So when you look at the Canterbury context in terms of these stock exclusion rules, this is the rule in sort of plain language. So you're not allowed to cause pugging, and that's any pugging, discoloration of water or devegetation of the banks with any farmed livestock in any intermittently or permanently flowing water body. So what that means, if there's somewhere that carries water at some point in time in the year, then that's defined as a water body. So to give an example of that, one of our clients got tripped up with this rule. There's about 14 cattle on an extensive farming system in a water body that was flowing 3 or 4 times a year. And so what I did, I said to the compliance officer, if I go like that with my gumboots, there's no water flowing there now, but there's been water through there with the heavy rain, and I go like that, does that trigger the rule for non-compliance? And they said, yes, it does. So what that rule means in practice, if you think of your hill country farms around here, no farmed livestock causing pugging. And in Canterbury, the farmed livestock is not just cattle, it's sheep, cattle, deer, pigs, goats, horses, farmed livestock causing pugging. And you're in breach of the rule. Okay, so that's widespread. You know, all of our hill and high country farmers are non-compliant with that rule every day, all the time. Your freshwater farm plans, what they're saying with your freshwater farm plans, to be fit for purpose, they have to meet the existing rules relating to fresh water. So you can see for all of the farmers in Canterbury, the hill and high country farmers, it's impossible for us to meet our freshwater plan requirements or have a freshwater plan that we can actually practically implement. I haven't looked into too much detail with your Southland rules. I mean, you're going through a regional plan process at the moment, which is a bit of a mess because it's in the appeals. So what it's going to end up with, who knows? But there's quite a few rules in our region, certainly in Canterbury, that farmers aren't able to comply with. The next point is that, and we've already covered this, the farmers pay for everything. Farm plans, certification and auditing. But what that means too is that, and we know what it's like as a business, I mean, our work is discretionary spend. So a lot of our clients, they do value it as essential to be doing this environmental work, but at the end of the day, it's discretionary spend. And so all this money that's going to be spent on all this bureaucracy is going to mean less work done on the environment. Now, we saw that happen. Do you have overseer down here? Have you got any overseer mandatory requirements down here? Does anyone know? No, so not sure. But anyway, in Canterbury, there was a mandatory requirement to do overseer. And, you know, it was costing somewhere around $2,000-3,000. But what we saw happen was all that did was to take a lot of money out of the environmental spend budget. So farmers in Canterbury had to do overseer nutrient budgets, all sorts of stuff in terms of compliance. There was a big drop-off in the environmental spend on actions on the ground because they just didn't have the money there like they would normally have. The next point. Has anyone got farm plans here? Industry farm plans or an ES farm plan? How many people have got some type of farm plan? Are most of those industry-related farm plans, like your Fonterra Open? How many of them are probably mostly on Fonterra Open Country type farm plans? Are they? What about sheep and beef guys? Has anyone got sheep and beef guys got farm plans? Beef and lamb? You've got your beef and lamb LEP or something? Yep. Deer? Yeah. And the arable guys? Anyone's? No. Okay. The arable are very compliant. So the new legislation completely changes the ball game for existing farm plans. Completely. Anyone with existing farm plans, whether it's your beef and lamb or your Fonterra or your farm plans, you have to have a farm plan that meets this new legislation. So that means either upgrading your farm plan or redoing it to match the new legislation. If you look at Taranaki Regional Council, who I feel very sorry for because of the situation they're in, is that they've spent 25 years with a farm plan system. They've got 99% of their dairy farmers and around 70% of their sheep and beef farmers in a partnership approach to farm plans, action-focused, voluntary partnership farm plans. And Taranaki Regional Councils were the strongest council to oppose this farm plan legislation. And part of the reason why they opposed it was because they could see it was completely the wrong approach and it was going to undermine that 25 years of work they had done to build up this concept of farm plans. Because farm plans are a good thing, okay? They can be they're a useful tool used in the right context. As soon as you introduce legislation over farm plans, it completely changes them, and that's what's happened here. And so Taranaki Regional Council have got to go back to the drawing board and redo all of those. The farmers have to redo all of the farm plans to meet the new legislative requirements. The next point there, freshwater farm plans must be consistent with Te Mana Otawai, which is the life-supporting capacity of water is paramount. And they also have to be consistent with catchment context, challenges and values identified by regional councils and limits such as for nitrogen. It is quite unclear what this is all going to mean on the ground, but the essence of the change is that previously, when you were looking on on an individual farm, your individual farms through the RMA, you were able to sort of look at these considerations, which is environmental, economic, social, and cultural. So you could sort of do like a balancing approach. But now this Te Mana Utawai and the way they've designed the legislation, they've tipped that up and said, no, water's way up here. Your other considerations, economic, social, and cultural, are down below here. So what that actually means, I mean, we're looking at Canterbury and thinking how strict it is now under the existing legislation, and this is going to be stricter. So what does that actually mean for you as individual farmers on the ground? It's not going to be easier, that's for sure. The next point there, certifiers, auditors and regional councils are placed in the unenviable position of having to enforce a legislated requirement that is widely opposed by farmers, as evidenced in submissions to the original legislation. So what I mean by that was when the Freshwater Farm Plan legislation first came out, and it was the one that Taranaki Regional Council opposed it, Greater Wellington District Regional Council opposed it. I'm not sure where your ES guys were on the original legislation, but a lot of farmers opposed it, especially from the sheep and beef sector, hill country sector. So what that does, when you think of a certifier or an auditor or a regional council, they have to implement a legislation that is not only unworkable, but the farmers have not bought into it. And so my discussion amongst my fellow consultants is that consultants are worried about being put in this unenviable position of having to draw up freshwater farm plans that A, you don't want, B, they don't work, and telling you you have to meet rules that you can't comply with. I mean, no one will want to be a certifier if they know exactly what they're going to have to do under this legislation. And I mean, that's what I'm saying to consultants that haven't got their head around this. But a lot of consultants are actually, that I'm talking to, have got their head around it, and they're saying the same as me. Who would want to be a certifier? The last point I mentioned there, and again, this is another important one. So every farmer requires a state-prescribed freshwater farm plan, regardless of the effects or intensity of their activities, regardless of whether there are any water quality issues within their catchment. Okay, this is a significant change in the way that people are regulated over. So what I call this is unfettered state control, and it's a significant change from the effects-based approach of the RMA. What I mean by that is that previously under the RMA, which is the Resource Management Act, so that's all of our environmental regulations, so all the rules that you operate in relation to farming and the environment. So it's your intensive winter grazing, it's your effluent, it's your subdivision, it's dust, it's noise, it's all those sorts of things. Previously, the regulators, and the regulators is defined as the councils or the government, could not regulate or require you to be regulated unless they had good justification for doing so. And that justification had to go through a process which was called a cost-benefit analysis and an alternatives analysis. So they had to do a pretty thorough assessment justifying regulation over you. And our council, local district council, lost a court case that I was involved with. I've been involved with a couple now, but they lost this one as well because they hadn't done that justification analysis to justify the regulations. This freshwater farm plan legislation completely removes that restraint on the regulator. So the government are regulating for the sake of regulation. This is a massive change. Massive change. We have not seen a change in the way that the state regulates over people like this for a long time. I mean, it's a massive change. Okay, and I mean it is good to see, particularly beef and lamb have started coming out finally. And they're saying that there's no justification for this sort of regulation over farms that are extensive farming activities. They're low input, low impact systems, farming systems. Okay, so at least beef and lamb are starting to pick up on this, but we've got a long way to go there yet too. I guess we'll come to the boycott at next, but maybe I'll just we'll just go through any more questions on the farm plans for now. The comment was it's a great way for a corporation to make a shitload of money out of people. Yeah, I mean it is. But the other thing that was quite interesting was I do a lot of research, okay? I just digging in behind all of this all the time. And one of the things I picked up was on, I think it's called JobSeek. And there was a whole lot of jobs advertised, and they were freshwater farm plan supervisors and freshwater farm plan managers. Okay, a pay packet of 200 grand, and I'm thinking, man, that's sweet. I could take that quite easily and pick that up. So 200 grand, 200,000 pay packet. That was for the supervisors, and then there was the general or managers, I think they called them. And they were 165 to 200,000, and they were looking for these people to spread geographically across New Zealand as regional and to leaders of multidisciplinary freshwater farm plan teams, something like that, you know. And this was the Ministry for the Environment. So the Ministry for the Environment is in charge of all this sort of environmental regulations. I mean, the amount of money being poured into that was I think there was about 6 or 8 different positions advertised there. You know, at 200 grand each, you know, there's $1 million. So, yeah, it's money. It's money. Yeah, it's money for jam. Yep. But I guess if you're a certifier, I think the certifiers is going to be, if this legislation stays, which I don't expect it to. I mean, the word amongst consultants is that it is so bad it's going to fall apart. The question is for you guys tonight is, and I guess it's one of the things that's come down from Canterbury with our meeting our latest meeting we had up in North Canterbury. The question we asked is, how much do we try and stop it now, or how much do we let it go and get it so bad that then it tips over? And we discussed this as a group of farmers, the Rural Advocacy Network. We discussed it at a meeting. We had about 20 of us there, and the unanimous feeling was we need to stop it now. Because what we're saying in Canterbury from the farmers' point of view is that there's so much pressure on farmers, overwhelmed, burnout, all that sort of thing. We actually need to stop it now, and we need to stop it at the start. So we'll come to, I'll explain the boycott, but is there any more questions on the farm plan legislation?
Much of it would change with a change of government. How much of it would fall over?
The question was, how much of it would change with a change of government? That's a little bit unknown, but the answer is definitely yes. It would definitely change. We've met with several political parties and organisations that and had discussions around this space. Yeah, so you would definitely see some change. The degree of change, we're still working through that, because what we're doing is the political parties particularly, they're hearing from the industry groups, but they're getting different message from the industry groups than they're getting from us. Because from us, they're getting, we tell it how it is, okay? And so they're indicating to us, and I think particularly, I would say the ACT Party, our meeting with them, they are well aware of the failings of this legislation. And if they're in government, they will certainly be pushing for changes.
We're not certainly not going to push any political party here. We know what we don't want. But the fact is that since there's been a change with Todd McClay taking on Agriculture for National, his attitude is totally different than anybody else that we've come across in National in the past. I should clarify that by saying Joseph Mooney is very receptive of catchment group setups, but with regional councils and no central government involvement. So there is hope there.
Any other questions on? Yep. First thing I would say is don't be first. Don't be first. I mean, that's something that we've learned with our issues in Canterbury. We've been first so many times, and God, it's just a mess if you go first. When you look at the way the whole environmental legislation is not working now, the consenting system in Canterbury, I mean, the consenting system in Canterbury is paralysed. And I mean, I work with a lot of farmers that are in consents, that are going through consents. 2, 3, 4 years is not unheard of, and still not get your consent. Okay, it's an absolute mess. So don't rush into it. I will speak about options for you as an area once we've sort of covered off the questions around farm plans. Yeah. Other questions around farm plans? Yep.
Just on the information as to why Waio and Aparima have actually been put on the box is, see that lovely round hill that you got there up there on the tackies? It's actually got a 50-metre seam of urowagalite in it, and it runs, there's espadites and there's actually rare minerals that run all the way up to Mosburn. And I've worked on a lot of these dairy farms over my lifetime up this valley, and there are times when the nitrate levels, you can see them in the animals. So there's high nitrate all the way down this valley here, right up to just past Nightcap sort of Wairero area.
Natural levels.
It's the mines is just in that dip over there, and it's naturally 14 to 13. And that's what Environment Southland were using as their data, was actually the mines reference. You've also got on the Waio side, the Ojai mines is also the same mineral content. But the alarming thing with this river, right, Waio was the first river that had Didimo introduced to it by Fish and Game.
Yep.
And the control of the water flow and the growth of the Didimo is 200% in one day. and it naturally converts your 4.5 or your, clean water. It doubles and triples it because of those minerals that are actually in there. Environment Southland voted to take that source of nitrate and phosphate off the books years ago, okay? And it's always been the total nitrate that farmers have always seen. But this valley up here, there's a monitoring site just after Mosburn. The next monitoring site is down here in Te Aroha. Same thing with the Waiau. It's just down from the dam there. And then there's one past Tuatapere. There is also one that's on the river that runs the Morley. We call it the Morley. That runs down Arauia and comes out there. But there's one right down there. But the mining sector have large streams that run into these sources, and they are not monitored.
So why are you saying that the Aparima, how's that relevant to the Aparima being first?
Because the mine's water runs straight out into the Aparima just before Aotearoa up here.
Okay.
But the monitoring site's just on the other side.
Yeah, okay. So you're talking about the actual science. If you get a chance to, I did a video for Groundswell, it was quite a while ago, on some freshwater science up in our area, and I went through 4 things that were happening with the science. I mean, there's science and there's science. But if you've got time, have a look at that video. But what we have done just recently is that there's been a report in relation to the braided rivers in Canterbury and intensive farming next to braided rivers. And we've dug into that a lot, and I'll put it this way, I have got zero confidence in the science being put in front of us from our regional council. And if you look at that video and what I put together and what we uncovered, it is shocking. It's not only just shocking, it's disgusting. It's disgusting what they are doing with this so-called science. You'll see more come out on this in relation to Environment Canterbury shortly, because we're pursuing this, not just as a group, but as farmers that have been impacted by this so-called science. So it's very hard to know with the science what we can trust and what we can't trust. One of the things we've also found in our area is that it's important to understand where the sources of nitrogen are and likes of phosphorus. Like we've had some high phosphorus counts in our rivers. But you've got to understand what the sources are and break that down. We had an issue here, one of those ones was in relation to E. coli. High E. coli counts in the river at the testing above at the swimming site in one of our main rivers. And of course farmers were getting blamed. And we didn't believe it was farming. I mean, this is Colvin and this is dairy farming country, but we knew the way the land flowed. We knew that there was forestry between the river and the dairy side on the north. So we challenged that, and the mayor of our district council said requested a DNA analysis. Well, the DNA analysis came back and said it's 99.9% avian, conclusive that it was avian. What they discovered was it was a seagull colony a kilometre upstream from the testing site. And that's what was causing the E. coli. Farmers were being blamed. So, I mean, we're in difficult times because, we don't know what to believe. I guess from a Pomahaka point of view, I mean, Bryce can probably explain a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, most of you probably know that I was a founding member of the Pomahaka Water Care Group, and we found that the first thing you had to do was actually test your sources of water. And you can't do anything about water quality until you know what's in your water. And then even when you know, it's a little bit limiting. But what we found is our focus after a couple of years shifted away from the mainstream, and it actually started going up tributaries. And by doing that, you could actually work out a hot spot. And some of these tributaries, it was well up them, and it might have only been 6 or 7 farms. Sometimes it was bad practice. Sometimes, you get peats and you get all different things that leach different stuff into your waterways. So, but at least you knew where it was. So if you want to get water improvement, the secret is testing. The secret is getting everybody to buy in. It's a lot of people doing a little bit. And you can get on top of these things, and we've had a steady increase in water quality ever since we've done it. We've now just put in, I think, about 75 kilometres of riparian plantings. Whether they make a difference or not, I guess we'll know in another couple of 3 years. But there are ways to do it, with address these things without having to go through what we're being asked to do with these freshwater farm plans.
So any other questions in relation to freshwater farm plans? Yep.
Yes, I've got one here where it says that the farm plans must be consistent with Te Mana Atiwai. Could you give us more detail, quite a lot more detail, on what Te Mana Atiwai is? This is the same Te Mana Atiwai at the top of Three Waters. And could just say what that group actually is.
So,
and I suggest if you don't know, the crowd here tonight, go home, type it in, and you'll be quite surprised what it is if you don't already know.
What might be surprised in what it actually means, what Te Mana Atiwai means. Yeah, so I mean, it basically means that the health of the water is paramount.
The group of people, the iwi, behind it all. Everything in Three Waters has to go through the Te Mana Atiwai, has to be passed by the group of iwis. It has to be consistent with all our cultural, as you want to call it, desires of our iwi. I'm taking that this is the same Te Mana Atiwai here that's going to be required in our farm plan?
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges that we have got in Canterbury at the moment with the consenting and planning system, is that the regional council are trying to get their head around about what this actually means, and then trying to understand what it means for an individual farm going through a consent, and no one can give us an answer as to exactly what it means, because it's shifted the whole way the system works. There's no longer a balancing thing between economic, environmental, social, cultural. You've actually got water as supreme up the top here. But what does that actually mean on farm? Does that mean you can have no pollution of water? What does it actually mean on farm? And what we're getting from our regional council is that they don't know what it means yet in the farm plan context or in an individual farm situation.
Why are we doing anything at all if it's so unclear?
Because there's actually lots of legislation that is so unclear. So we've got lots of examples in Canterbury where there's rules that are vague or that are not clear. I mean, you've got them in Southland. You only have to read through your land and water regional plan, look at some of the rules. You try and interpret them. There's a lot of stuff in legislation that is not black and white. Okay, there's a lot of grey and there's a lot of clarity missing. Yeah. So with what this actually means for an individual farmer, we don't really know yet. One of the roles of the certifier.
Those plans in.
Pardon?
So we're boycotting it because we're blindly going along, giving our information over to who knows who, what.
Yeah, so this is going to be one of the roles of the certifier. The certifier is going to be responsible for understanding what Te Mana Atiwai means. They need to understand about the Treaty of Waitangi. They need to understand a whole lot of aspects, not just cultural ones, but your catchment context, your catchment values, all that sort of stuff. The certifiers are the ones that have to understand that. They're going to have to interpret it, what it means.
Go home and look it up, because it's the same Te Mana Atiwai that's in the Three Waters.
Right.
And it's all your cultural stuff.
Yeah.
And if iwi don't agree, that's where it stops. That's the rules of this. That's the rules in this country where we're heading.
Yeah.
It's the iwi.
Yeah. Yeah. So your farm plans, yeah, I guess it's an unknown. Yeah. So don't rush into it.
Any regional councillors here?
We've had Environment Southland councillors at Lumsden today, and Southland District councillor was there too. We had Environment Southland councillor at Gore last night. Is there any Environment Southland councillors here? Pardon? No, you're from Southland District, aren't you, Jasper? Yeah, no, there's no ES councillors here tonight, I don't think.
And the rules, so they should be able to explain exactly what it means.
We had quite robust discussion with the ES councillors today at Lumsden. There was Peter McDonald and Jeremy McPhail there, and we're also just having a Groundswell meeting with Environment Southland tomorrow. There'll be quite a few of the councillors there and staff, and I'll be explaining to them about the Freshwater Farm Plan legislation. They got a very strong message from the Lumsden meeting. That was a great meeting. I mean, you know, they didn't hold back, those guys, and yeah, they gave the ES guys a very strong message. But what I said was that, you know, councils are meat in the sandwich to a certain extent, but they are also your representatives. And what we've agreed to do, probably from those both meetings and what we'll be raising tomorrow, is that ES has got a responsibility to look after the interests of their community. So ES actually need to stand up on your behalf and say this legislation is unworkable. What we've suggested to the ES councillors is that they join in with other councils around the country, you know, like Taranaki, West Coast, the ones they'll definitely get support from, and challenge this legislation and pretty much say to the government, we cannot implement this legislation. This is going to be too difficult, too hard on our communities. It's going to be too hard on relationships, all those reasons why. So we'll be putting the pressure on the regional councils to do this. So if you wanted to talk to your own regional councillors, encouraging them to do this as well. What happened in Canterbury is we had a meeting at the end of last year with the chairman of Environment Canterbury and one of the councillors, and at that meeting they acknowledged that the whole planning framework consenting system was unworkable. They said that the national policy statement of freshwater, just that alone could not be implemented. Okay, and so they're aware of it. I believe your regional council here and are aware of it to a certain extent. They actually just need now to stand up. Yeah.
My question would be, if it's that unworkable, why are they just not saying we're not going to do it?
So the response we got today, which I challenged, was that if we say no, we're not going to do it, then the government will bring in commissioners. And that is a risk, but what I said to them was that you don't want to do this alone. You don't want to do this as one regional council. You want to actually drive it through local government. Just like what we saw with Three Waters. And I mean, we've got our three local district councils strongly opposing Three Waters. They joined our Groundswell protest in support of our protest because they're so passionate about what Groundswell are saying and support what we're saying, not just on Three Waters, but on some of these other regulations as well. So there would be a lot of, I guess it comes back to courage.
That if the regional councils are unable to make it work, what would commissioners do?
Well, that's just a threat that David Parker and the government put across to the regional councils. And I mean, I would say to the regional councillor that said that today that I don't accept that. That's just an excuse for not standing up. And so what I said was that there is a different way to do it, is to work as a whole lot of councils and do it as a whole lot of councils. Because the government are not going to step in and say, well, we're going to replace all you 8 or 10 or 12 councils with commissioners. They're not going to do that. If you do it as one council, you're a lone voice. So what we want to see, and we'll support councils to do this, is to stand up together. I think all the councils throughout the country, there'll be a degree of recognition that the whole legislative framework, not just freshwater farm plans, is unworkable. My discussions with various councils, council staff, consultants throughout the country, this is not just a Canterbury or just a Southland issue. This is a national problem.
It's interesting because ultimately what happens rests with the people involved. The power is always with the people, and even though the people that are elected to represent us are caught in a sandwich situation because they're getting the directives from central government. But if farmers or food producers get behind the community, if the community make a decision and everybody stands firm on that decision, there's actually not a lot that they can really do. So I guess that's the thing. We can empower Environment Southland and regional councils just by standing up and saying we're not going to do it. And we've always run a policy of when it gets that bad that you can't do it, you just have to say no. And this is getting where it's at. So, I mean, that's up to you ones as a catchment. You're the first ones up. I can assure you that the other meetings we've been to, they're right behind it if you ones decide not to do this. And we have other things that I'll talk to you about after that we can do to put it in place.
I guess that sort of leads into the question now is, what do you guys want to do? I mean, you're first in the country. You're in a very awkward position. I mean, we've always had the view that it's up to you as individuals to make a decision whether you say no or not, and we must all respect each other's decision. But what do you do as a community, as a catchment, being the first in the country, setting the precedent in terms of this legislation, which we know how bad it's going to be, certainly from a Canterbury point of view. We do not want this legislation in. It's in now, but we want to stop it. And we want to stop it now. And so I guess from a Groundswell, from a Canterbury, I can say from a North Canterbury perspective, we will back and support you guys, and I'll be speaking up in the Waikato in 2 weeks' time. We've got several meetings throughout the Waikato, exactly the same as this, and we'll be offering that same support. We've got Groundswell coordinators up in the Waikato that are ready to rally the troops to support the communities to stand up and say no. And I guess the question is, in saying no, what does that actually look like? And I'll just give an example of how it can work. So with our local district council, when we got bit in the bum with this SNA thing, it sort of really riled us up as a community. And we were at war with our council, our local district council, and it got just worse and worse and worse. The battle lines were drawn, and it was war. But one of the things that the farmers did was that at that stage I was part of the Federated Farmers team, and we ran out of money. It cost us 70 grand through the court process, and we pretty much ran out of money. So we just had to pull out when we did. And there was a mediated agreement, and that mediated agreement basically said that the council were going to come out on farms and do these review the surveys. Well, what happened was that around 90% of the farmers, there was a campaign organised, and about 97% of the farmers said no. So they joined together and said no. There was a lot of work went in behind the scenes to provide a support base to allow farmers to do that. But what that did is that's transformed our district in terms of the relationship between the council and the community. Because what that did was that the council were hamstrung. They couldn't do anything because 97% of the farmers had said no. So what happened then was we had, over the space of 2 elections, the council were thrown out. The mayor and councillors, there was a change of guard because they had the battle lines had been drawn, and it was really just war. So they got thrown out. New council came in. And what we've seen now is a massive transformation. I mean, our Huranui District Council are, they are highly respected in amongst the community now. They initiated a plan change to remove all mapped SNAs, the first council in the country to do it. So all of the SNAs that were still left, we had ours knocked out through the Environment Corp, most of it, but all the rest of the SNAs and the rest of our one on our farm were all removed by the council through the plan process. And then what we've got now is that we've got a very good working relationship with our district council. I mean, like I said, we had the local mayors, 3 of them, standing up at our Groundswell protest. We have the local council and local mayor come to our Rural Advocacy Network meetings. We have got a very strong relationship. That all came about because our community put their foot down and said no. And we had 97% backing. The 3%, we respected their rights to say yes. They didn't support the campaign, but those 3% of farmers that didn't support our campaign have all come back to us since then and apologised for saying not supporting the campaign because they recognised now that it was the right thing to have done. So what we're thinking from a Groundswell point of view is, I mean, we're putting it to you guys as a community as to what you want to do. but we'll back you all the way. We'll give as much support as we can. What that support looks like, well, we're open to ideas. Edwin up there is part of our crew, so we're open to suggestions, but one of the options is that you could look at setting up a support network that works in with Groundswell. We keep you informed of where things are at, answer your questions, and you're a support base for farmers, landowners to start this No campaign. We're happy to hear ideas. What your thoughts are.
So what happens if these guys go to Fonterra Open Country Alliance and put regulations in that we've got to meet before they accept our product? You know, like at the moment we're ones and twos going, no, we're not going to do this. But they're going to go the next step. So can we stop that?
Yeah, so when you say that they are going to the next step, who's the they?
Well, the people that want this water thing in.
The government, okay.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is that we are working to head these things off. So we've written to all councils throughout New Zealand, and we've written several times actually, explaining why we're saying no to freshwater farm plans, why we're saying no to SNAs, and we're putting councils, we're saying we want to work for councils, but we're also putting them on notice. If any councils try to force this issue on to farmers, we will be there, boots and all. We will mobilise, boots and all. And that's what we did in our district. We said to our council, if you try and force this issue on an individual farmer, we will be in there, boots and all. And they pulled out straight away. They didn't even bother trying to challenge it. The second thing in terms of your comment, we've also written to fertiliser companies, processors. You know, we've been writing to them, communicating with them, alerting them to, because they're sort of having this narrative, you farmers need to do this because our overseas markets are demanding all that sort of garbage. So we're challenging that, and we're saying we're trying to and educate all these different organisations. There's a bigger picture here in terms of the unworkability of the regulations, the impacts on people, like the impacts on mental welfare, the impacts, the amount of workload on farmers, the overwhelming aspect of it, the relationships, how it breaks up relationships between councils and communities, all those sorts of things. So we're sharing that information with those other organisations to I guess to try and educate them and preempt something like that happening.
Yeah, there's one or two other things that something that Groundswell's worked on extensively is actually bringing urban people into work with food producers, and we changed that rhetoric to food producers because we believe that people in urban areas are losing sight of the fact that that's exactly what we do. We produce their food, and it's getting massive buy-in, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on, a little bit more. So we're not fighting alone. People are realising that we're under the pump, and there's one thing that's come out of these meetings, and that is the support of other farmers for you guys, because you guys are first up. And there was a suggestion made that when you're boycotting something or standing against it, it's very easy to think you're the only one doing it. So it might take a little bit of sacrifice by everybody, but we thought we'd set up a register on a website, and people could register that they're going to stand against this, so that everybody going, so your name's going to be public. But I mean, we've got to do that. We've got to take a stand, so it's got to be public. So people could go in and just see what sort of support there are. It was brought up by a councillor today that we'd have to be careful we didn't get every townie putting their name in there as well. And I'm not sure how we'll get around that, but we'll be working on it. So I asked the question today, would people be prepared to stand and do that? Okay, because that gives people confidence that they're not the only one out there that's taken that stand. So it's something we can work on.
That was a big change for us in Huranui. I mean, initially we started the Say No SNAs, and there was about 8 of us, and we didn't know what sort of support we would get, and it was a big call, and it was nervous times because we didn't know what sort of support we would get. So we were blown away when we got the level of support that we did, and it just made a massive difference. Yeah.
Was made with you people supporting Groundswell, the changes that there's been. And that's not because of Groundswell, it's because of the groundswell of people. And the government know that, and they know what they're up against now. So we've got respect, and they know that we mean action, but that means the people are going to take action, not Groundswell.
So any other thoughts? I mean, you can get back to either Bryce or Laurie or Mel or myself or Edwin, if you all know Edwin. If there's anyone that wants to help with this, then probably maybe contact Edwin. You know, how we did it in Huranui was we just got a whole lot of people together. We just got at a pub one night and said, okay, got the word around. Who's keen to actually put some ideas together? We thrashed around a few ideas, and then we shared those ideas with farmers and said, this is what we're thinking of doing. What do you guys all think? And then we got the feedback, and then right, this is what everyone's saying we want to do, and so that's how we got going.
I mean, we're out of towners and we're looking around. Would you know what percentage of your catchment group would be here tonight? Would there be quite a percentage of it? Yeah, that you strike that everywhere. I mean, they're busy with families and they've got, it's difficult to get young people to turn out. Doesn't mean they don't care. Doesn't mean that they're deeply involved in it. But yeah, I just wanted to get an idea whether most of your catchment would be.
Yeah, there's 600 landowners in the catchment, and there's 110 people here, so that gives you an idea.
600.
Is that in the Aparima catchment?
Yep.
Yep. So when you're thinking of the farm plan legislation, the government, through the legislation, has drawn maps as to what is defined as the Aparima catchment. So it does include areas like down around Riverton that don't necessarily, you have to look at the maps to see if you're affected, okay? And because it doesn't naturally follow just the Aparima catchment, okay? So it does go out. I'm not so familiar with the geography around here, but you know, there's areas around Riverton that actually don't flow into the Aparima that are included as part of the 1st of August rollout. Yeah. So someone, maybe Edwin, I'll share you that map that's in the legislation, because that defines the area.
Just have you got sections of your catchment split up here? Can you tell me? Is it all one big catchment, or do you have a it is separated. Do you know how many different branches?
You've got like sub-catchments or upper, lower and mid, something like that. Something like that.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, that's a really good way to start, because then you're dealing with the people in your own catchment area. But because somebody's going to have to coordinate it and get the message out for a start. And Edwin is, of course, the base camp. So...
yeah, there's, yes, you're right. What's the area called? Oropuki, yeah. Yeah, that area is all included as well, as defined as the 1st of August, yeah. But they just called it Aparima catchment, but yeah. And Fiordland as well is the other area. We had a couple from Fiordland at Lumsden, yeah. So we're thinking of those guys too. But who was part of the, I know Edwin was, but was anyone else part of the Freshwater Farm Plan pilot scheme? So is anyone else part of that pilot scheme here? Part of that farm plan pilot scheme? No. There was about 10 down here. Is that right, Edwin, I think? 10 farmers. Yeah.
Oh, excuse me there. Have you thought about doing like an online petition to see what people thought, like maybe through your website, and to see what the country's actually thinking about this whole matter?
The short answer is no, we haven't. I guess we were trying to be respectful of you people, and as Jamie's already pointed out, that we're really interested how you ones cope with this, because you're the first ones up. So that's the reason we're here, basically. I mean, and that's another thing. We're in your hands. If that's a suggestion.
We might be first up, but there's a lot following after us.
I can tell you they're against it, but it's all very well saying you're against it when you're not in the line of fire.
Yeah, I mean, for quite a lot of farmers, they're not facing the start date. You know, Canterbury's 2025 for our start date. That's a long way out. But you know, from North Canterbury perspective, we realise we're not going to wait till 2025. And I guess from our point of view, we've got audited farm plans through our regional council already, not so much in the hill country sector because all of the hill country guys said no, but there is irrigated farm plans, audited ones. There's not much in the hill country sector, but what we know is, we need to stop it now. So we're not going to wait till 2025. We need to stop it now, however we can.
Very interesting. You probably saw in yesterday's Southland Times in the middle pages how they were answering the questions on freshwater farm plans, and it sounded so good. Did anybody see it by any chance? Yeah. Did you get conned by it? Did you think, oh, there's nothing wrong with this? Yeah, exactly right. We commented on that. They've got this very attractive, I don't know if you're allowed to say that nowadays, eh?
Yeah, a couple of the, when there was the freshwater farm submission process or the legislation when it first came out, a couple of the larger consultancy firms in the country supported that legislation. When I read their submissions and saw that here's consultancy firms supporting legislation that's going to make it mandatory for every farmer to have a mandatory farm environment plan and certification and auditing, and you've got a consultancy firm supporting that, two major farming consultancy firms. I'm not going to name them tonight, but they know who they are, but they're supporting this legislation. What's going to happen is that I think there's going to be some shoulder tapping on large consultancy firms to become part of the system in terms of certifiers and auditors. Certainly some of the smaller consultants and independent consultants like myself, to talk amongst ourselves, is we don't want a bar of it. In terms of forcing it through, who would force it through? Well, David Parker's probably going to turn around to the regional councils and say, you need to do this.
So you're wanting us to get the ball rolling and for us to act as a group. Why don't you just name those guys so we can actually start to sort of see who's on our side? Like if they're wanting to go for this, why would we want to be associated with those people in particular?
So sorry, what are you suggesting? Name
You just said two large consultant companies.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you name them? Like you're asking us all to act as a group, but you don't want to name those companies that have actually want to put this in.
Pardon? Yeah. I understand what you say.
Like we're a group, and if all that information helps for us going forward, I would have thought.
Yeah.
100%.
I guess you're putting me on the spot a bit, but it's one consultant calling out some other consultants, but it is public information. It's in the submission details as to who those firms were. Yeah, I don't know if they're actually operational down here. I don't know who the two are from memory. I know one's Ag First. Okay. I'm probably going to have a target on my back, but bugger it. And the other one, I can't remember offhand who it was, but it was recorded in the MFE submissions, in the summary of submissions, who those two main consultancy firms were. There were others. Yep. If you want me to, I can go through the list and dig it out. I mean, I certainly didn't put in to support the legislation. I know other consultants that didn't put in to support the legislation. I mean, Well, it comes back to integrity. It comes back to, I mean, for me, it's an integrity thing. It's an honesty and integrity. I mean, why would you put in a submission supporting a legislation that's going to benefit you financially big time? I mean, to me, that's just blatant conflict of interest. And I mean, as a consultant or someone working with farmers that's passionate about working with farmers, that just doesn't, I'm not going to say any more about it. I'm pretty angry about that. So, I mean, Groundswell is prepared to call out. Yeah.
I throw them up in Te Ao now, and we're going to be up against it up there because we've got Landcorp or Pamu, and they're going to be strictly by the books, and even though they don't make a cent of profit and not very nice to farm beside, they are going to set an example that we should supposedly follow. I don't know how we're going to tackle this.
Are they caught in the Aparima area?
Upper Waikato.
So they won't be till 2024. Fiordland, I'm not sure whether they would be in Fiordland or Upper Waia. I'd have to have a look at the maps. Can you contact Edwin and have a look at the maps if I send Edwin the link and see if they are in this first stage?
Look, we understand what you're talking about because we know with the winter grazing consents, there was 4 individual farmers got them, the rest are all corporates. So that tells you something, doesn't it? And that's why it's important that we stand together as farmers, food producers, because we're not going to get the corporates to do it.
Any other questions? Yep.
They have refused to disclose to the farmers when they are sharing that information off their regional software holdings company, because there's multiple councils are loading all that data on that data site and they're sharing it. And there's no notification for the farmers when they are actually viewing your farm plans. And that is one way of stopping them, is saying, I'm not signing anything until I see a non-disclosure clause. Because that is actually one of the main issues of how the Minister of Environment's got a lot of the information is off regional software holdings.
So do you think that regional software holdings is going to be the platform that they're using for farm plans? Because
they've been using it since 2009.
Okay.
Environment, Southland have, and so has Horizon and the other councils. There's actually 9 in there now, and that's what they're doing, is they can view your data and everything they've loaded on there without notification, and it's got to stop because it's your private information.
Yeah, when you say it's got to stop, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we have to say no, because there's just no protocols around your private property information, whether it's freshwater farm plans or SNAs, all these sorts of things. There's just nothing there that respects our private property information. And until we get that changed, then I mean, we're certainly up in our neck of the woods. We're saying no, and that's one of the things. You know, once that's fixed and we've got these unworkable regulations workable, then yeah, we're more than happy to do farm plans. We're more than happy to talk about approaches to addressing biodiversity, just not SNAs. We're not going to have SNAs, but there's different ways to tackle these issues. And I guess that's one of the things we're also saying is we're not opposed to farm plans, okay? And we're not opposed to looking after biodiversity. What we're opposed to is the legislative context that they're putting farm plans into and the legislative context that they're putting the SNAs into. We're saying the SNAs, completely different approach, QE2 trust covenants. I mean, that sort of system works really well. And I'll probably briefly go over SNAs at some point. Maybe I'll do that now, and then we come back to more questions.
Yeah, just to answer, can you put that, what you've said tonight, in an email to us? I mean, I won't remember it all. We need that sort of information so we can actually research it and get it out to people. Thank you.
Before tonight, I presume the industry bodies, Fonterra, Dairy NZ, Beef and Lamb, were going to come and hold our hand while we and do these plans. And I'm presuming that's correct. So how much gearing up have they actually done so far? Because we're only a week away, less than a week, from starting this process, if we go ahead.
Yeah.
And, you know, where do we go from there? Because there'll be a fair bit of money and time spent gearing up to get these plans underway, I presume.
Have you had Beef and Lamb or Dairy NZ or any of those guys down here helping you gear up for farm plans? Where are they?
Well, I'm presuming it's going on behind the scenes.
Pardon?
I'm presuming it's going on behind the scenes because Fonterra come and helped us with the farm plans. But, you know, otherwise my head's in the sand and it won't happen for 18 months.
Yeah, your Fonterra farm plan is different to this freshwater farm plan. Yeah.
Beef and Lamb did a quick run around a month ago on this on Freshwater Farm Plans, just the basic of how to basically draw a map, but didn't go into detail. Actually, they had a monkey running it, and it was good to turn up for the pie. But
Sorry, what was that?
they had a monkey running the show on the night.
So what am I, a gorilla?
Well, luckily one of the local guys, he had his head around it, and he actually took over the meeting and did a brilliant job. Otherwise, Beef and Lamb would have left us in the dark. So they're not really got their head around it yet.
Yeah, well, they've been conspicuously absent on this one. And that's, I mean, Groundswell never intended to jump in the advocacy space. We always set up, I mean, initially we set up to actually support our farming groups. But the more we got going, the more we realised that it just wasn't happening. So we now seem to be the ones that are stepping into the advocacy space. I mean, we're the ones that are going up to the Waikato to do what we're doing tonight, to inform farmers that this is what the legislation is about. I mean, we pay levies to organisations to do this for us. Where are they?
And in saying that, you have got a pretty proactive Federated Farmers in Southland, probably one of the best in New Zealand. We get on pretty well with them, really. It's just the national body we don't get on with. So you're pretty fortunate that you've got such a good Federated Farmers.
Yeah, there's your maps there. So that's your Aparima FMU that's going to be first, and your Fiordland and Islands. So I don't know how many farmers are in that Fiordland and Islands. So, I mean, Tiana, you're in the Waiau. The Waiau is February 2024, I think it is, or August 2024. So your Waiau and your Ariti and your Mataura are in 2024. Some of them are in the February the 1st, and some are August the 1st, I think. Pardon? FMU stands for Freshwater Management Unit. It's a term out of the legislation. It just means an area. They've just drawn maps. I mean, that's yeah. The key is to see the key is to see where the boundaries are and whether which FMU you are in. Yeah.
We all know that David Parker is hell-bent on getting this through. What do you think his end game is? What's your thought? Why does he want? What's the outcome that he wants from forcing this through?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean,
I'll answer it, Jamie. Control farming.
Hey? Yeah.
Control farming.
Yeah. I have met David Parker once, and we took him round the Culverden area. How many of you are familiar with the Culverden, the Murray Basin area? It's in North Canterbury. There's about 70 dairy farms. It's got a lot of centre pivot irrigation. A lot of intensive farming. So we hosted David Parker there. This was a few years ago. And we were showing a lot of the environmental stuff that was happening on farms, and the Pāhau Enhancement Group and the work they were doing to fix their waterway and all that sort of stuff. He was just completely disinterested, really. What's he driving at? I mean, I don't know, but what's this government driving at? And he's part of this government. It's a lack of understanding of farming, or lack of respect for farming. It's all about control. It's all about, the government believe there's ways to achieve whatever their agenda is, and it's all around control. And so when you look at this legislation, and actually when you look at the Indigenous Biodiversity legislation for district councils, what stands out when you read through all of this legislation is that the government don't trust farmers, they don't trust consultants, they don't trust district councils, they don't trust regional councils. That's pretty much everyone. And that's how they've written this legislation. When I read that legislation, it reeks of someone that doesn't trust any of us. Okay. Well, there we are. There's the definition. Sorry? For the SNAs, maybe I'll just briefly
I
cover
was
the
going
SNAs.
to say, do you want to, Jamie will cover SNAs if you would like to hear a little bit about them? You would? Okay, let's do that.
It'll be a bit briefer than the farm plan one, but the SNAs affects all of you. Okay, it's like the freshwater farm plans. Every farmer will be impacted by this legislation. When I say SNAs, it's the Indigenous Biodiversity National Policy Statement, and it's just come into effect. And SNAs are called significant natural areas. Now, what this, so your freshwater farm plans is your regional councils, so it's ES, in Otago, if there might be one from Otago here, Bryce. And the SNA's Indigenous Biodiversity is your district councils, so that's Southland and Waikato Gore. And what the requirement is that district councils must assess all land within their district for the presence of areas that meet the criteria of significant natural areas. So there's a whole lot of criteria there in the legislation, and these criteria are much broader than what was previously in the legislation. So just to give you an idea, my assessment of our area in North Canterbury, so we've got hill country, a lot of steep hill country farms, high country farms, a bit like what I could see up around Lumsden, you know, in that hill country there. And my assessment based on the criteria in the legislation is that a lot of our hill and high country guys can expect 20 to 50% of their farms classified as SNA. Yep. So also with the SNA, exotic vegetation such as pines, willows, gorse and pasture can be classified as SNA. Pines, willows, gorse and pasture can be classified as SNA if they provide habitat for species that meet the significance criteria. What that basically means is if you've got something that's native that's in your pine forest, like a falcon or something like that, and it triggers the significance criteria, then that area can be an SNA. So you'll see like areas of gorse that have got rare lizards in them, or willows that have got bats in them. You know, these can all be areas that have been classified as SNAs. So if you've got no native bush on your farm and no native shrublands, don't think you're going to escape this one. The other thing with this is that there's requirements in terms of restoration of native vegetation and minimum percentage cover of indigenous vegetation in areas. So what that basically means is they're going to look at the plains. And it depends how they draw these maps. You know, these policy people love drawing maps, but it depends how they draw these maps. But if you think of, I mean, just because I'm staying with friends down in Riverton, dairy farmers down there, and I think of that Riverton area, and you just take all the flat area, what they could do is that they draw a map around it and say they need to achieve a target of 10% indigenous vegetation cover within that area. Okay, so how that actually, it's a bit like the freshwater farm plans, how it drops out on the ground is a little bit unclear in terms of that particular one. I'll just go through, it's in the handout there, I'll probably just flick through this one. Councils can enforce access to do an SNA assessment under section 333 of the RMA. I'm not aware of any councils, I mean maybe Jaspreet, you might know, I'm not aware of any councils that have tried to force access. It would be a very, very brave council to try and force access to have an SNA assessment. Yeah. The legislation is actually silent on who pays for the assessments, but it's likely to be the councils, which is you guys, it's the ratepayers, it's all of us. It's the ratepayers that will pay. Is anyone aware of the amount that Southland District Council estimated to do the SNA assessments? Do you know how much it was? Okay, well, the amount that they had when the legislation first came out was $18 million. So the 18 is 9 plus 9, and I think might need to clarify that because they did state 18 million, the 9 plus 9 being the cost of not only the assessments, but also then the planning processes and all of the hearings and all of that other stuff that goes with that process to actually do the SNAs through the legislation. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I guess the thing about this 18 million is that it's your money. Not 1 cent of that goes to helping biodiversity, helping you, or helping the environment. Not 1 cent of that. That's 18 million just for the assessments, the consultants, the lawyers, the administration, the bureaucracy. $600 over a period of 3 years each for every year for this. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it's a big cost. But in terms of you and in terms of landowners, I mean, the cost is more your time and the inconvenience of having, I guess, you've got enough people coming onto your farms now than having to deal with people that are going to come on and assess your land for SNAs. Yeah. So, what else is there here? So the legislation, this new legislation, I mean, what it does is it doesn't fix the flaws in the existing legislation, which is that biodiversity is a liability. If you've got and we learned that, we've got a lot of biodiversity on our farm because my parents protected a lot of bush and shrublands and tussock country. And what we've learned over time is that the more that landowners have done to protect the environment, the more you'll be penalised. And under this legislation, it's going to be even worse. So you've got more bureaucratic interference, rules and costs. Yeah, yeah. The legislation completely misses the point that comprehensive assessing of significance does not equate to protecting biodiversity. So I'm saying that from an ecological perspective. Okay, this is a box-ticking exercise. What is significant? What isn't? Is there anything special in these willows that triggers significance? It's a box-ticking exercise. And it's a big, costly box-ticking exercise. I mean, we're promoting a different approach to dealing with Indigenous biodiversity on farms, and it's a bit like, how many of you got QE2 trust covenants? Yeah, there's a few. It's a bit like that system, you know, much the same as the QE2 trust system, which basically is a partnership between the landowners and the QE2 trust. Well, it is a partnership. And you agree to the rules between yourself and the QE2 trust, and the rules are different for each landowner, okay? As well as the QE2 trust helps with fencing, weed and pest control, all those sorts of things. How many of you got falcons on your farm? Yeah, don't put your hand up. Because unfortunately, Laurie Patterson told me he had falcons on his farm before the Gore meeting, so I announced in the Gore meeting Laurie Patterson's got falcons on his farm. Because one of the things that district councils have to do is that they have to address this issue of highly mobile species. Okay? And the falcon is identified as a highly mobile species. It is a bird, yeah, so it's highly mobile. So that's another thing that the councils have to address. This is quite a big issue. If you're caught in this situation, it's a massive issue in this particular instance. So I can think of some individual property owners that are caught in this exact situation. The more land a property or farm has classified as an SNA, the more likely it will impact the future saleability of that property. Okay, and we have seen that, and that is pretty harrowing for farmers or landowners. It's not just rural, it's urban as well. You know, there's quite a few urban property owners that have been faced with all of their property being mapped as an SNA. And I gave the example, I've been giving the example with the meetings of the couple that I spoke to on the West Coast. 120 hectares, they bought it in 1974, and they didn't develop it. Just ordinary hard-working couple of Kiwi couple. They worked at separate jobs to pay off their block of land. They didn't develop it. Then it was mapped as a significant wetland. And what it was in the news, and what the real estate agent over there said was that the property is now virtually worthless. Okay, a neighbouring farm of the same size that had developed their property, like there was dairy farms around them that had developed. I mean, they had a value of 1.5 to 2 million. And this poor couple, their property was virtually worthless because the whole property had been mapped as a significant wetland. And there's no compensation. No compensation. There's a question at the back there. Yeah, so the comment was made that that a lot of that undeveloped land is Maori land, and I guess that's part of the reason why the particularly the Maori people up Northland had that big protest march. They protested over SNAs because basically, I mean, their argument in a nutshell was that the government had given the land back, and then they were just taking it back again through SNAs, which I mean, but it was interesting. Because I did quite a bit of work up there in terms of talking to people when I was on radio, including the local Maori radio station there. And the views of the Maori people up there in terms of this issue were very similar to us, you know, in terms of landowners wanting to do the right thing with the land, being empowered to do our own thing, you know, with the support of councils, and this issue of just taking land as an SNA. Was abhorrent to all of us, and that's why you had a massive protest march in the far north. Where it's got to now, I'm not quite sure. So SNAs, I'll just finish off. There's uncertainty with what the rules will be, okay? Each council will decide what the rules will be in each district. There's some minimums that the government have set, and councils must go at least to that minimum, but you'll find some councils will go stricter, depending on who you've got round the council table. These rules can change at any time without the affected landowner's knowledge, okay? And that's a big problem with SNAs, whereas with QE2 covenants, you guys that have got QE2 covenants, those rules cannot be changed without your agreement. Okay, you know for certain, forever, that's what it's going to be. Okay, and if you do want to change the rules, you negotiate with the QE2 trust and you agree to a change to the rules. But you've got 100% certainty. So there's no protocols around your private property information. I mean, it's a bit like the Freshwater Farm Plans. With the SNAs, there is no protocol around your private property information. And I've already explained how the misuse of that information can and still is happening. The last point I make there is that there is a proposal there from the government around a credit system for biodiversity. And, you know, I just have, when I see something like that, and I say here that scant on detail and fine print, and it is just a sweetener to, and I've likened it to sequestration credits for your emissions pricing. It's a sweetener to just get you to agree to the legislation. And I did mention with the sequestration credits, because I work in this space and I understand sequestration credits through the Heiwaka Eke Noa, what our industry groups and farming groups designed, I know how it all works. The whole thing was a con to get you to agree to emissions pricing. When you actually look at those sequestration credits developed through Heiwaka Eke Noa and apply them on an individual farm, there's hardly any vegetation that will qualify, okay? So like all of our riparian plantings, I could hardly find any riparian plantings that will qualify. And this is not under the government's proposal, this is under the industry group's proposal, Heiwaka Eke Noa. So what these are sweeteners to get you to agree to a policy. And that's what happened with Heiwaka Eke Noa. And we're still asking our industry groups in Heiwaka Noa to be honest with farmers on that one. Anyway, I don't have any faith in this credit system. What we need is actually workable policies. I guess I'll just call it quits on the SNA's Indigenous Biodiversity one for now. And any questions on that?
Yeah, like that's basically where we've come to now with this stage of the evening. And I guess that's something that we do have to decide. What we're here to do is say that whatever you do, we will back you up. We've tried to talk to Environment Southland, and we're going to spend some time with them tomorrow. We're going to try and encourage them to actually admit how bad this all is. And they know how the attitude we're taking to this. We're going to try and convince everybody to say no. So, I mean, do you need something tonight? Do you need to go away from here knowing that? Because we have a habit of being bearers of bad news because we try and say what's actually happening rather than gloss it over. But we need to deal to these things because if we don't deal to them, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. We're never going to be able to get to the point where they're happy. because there's too many other factions involved in the decision making. So we have to continually take a stand. So if you're prepared to take a stand, we're prepared to back you.
Well, the big thing is mobilisation across the whole farming sector, and I mean Groundswell's got a massive following now. We've got 102,000 signed our petition on emissions. We've got a massive, not just rural following, farmer following. We've got a big urban following as well. And I guess in terms of my view, and I mean I'm thinking of a Canterbury context with all the farming clients that I've got. That my wife and I have got, and with where we're at now and what's happening, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of farmers that, I mean, we've got big issues in Canterbury with the mental welfare. So I work in the support space, and interesting talking to one of your Southland District Councils, Margie Ruddenclaw, about how this pressure on farmers is flowing through into the kids at school. And so what we're seeing in Canterbury is across the whole community, and we've got farmers that are just struggling. We've got the kids, we've got, and a lot of it's the younger ones. You mentioned before the younger ones. And what we're finding in the last 12 months, it's a lot of our younger clients that are in their 30s, and they've got young kids, and they're burning out. I mean, I've got clients that just collapse in front of me now because they can no longer cope. And what I'm saying, and what you're hearing from people in the welfare space, and like Margie was saying, we're at a point now that we actually have to do something. We have to stand up now, and we can't let any more people suffer. There is too much suffering happening now, all because of the amount of unworkable regulations and the systems that are failing us. It's too much now. We can't let this go another day, because every day that we let this go, there's another one of my clients that drops off. They either quit farming, or they burn out, or, you know, we just got to stop this. And that's why, you know, we're committed to help you guys, because you're the first on the Freshwater Farm Plan. We're committed to give you 100% support to stop this legislation. We're committed to support councils to stand up, and we're asking for councils to mobilise together and stand up and say no as well. We need to do it now.
We've had people do that. Eventually, they have the power to take it out of your bank account, and they'll add the 10% on.
Shall we wait until after tomorrow before we answer that question?
Yeah. After we've talked to them. Okay. Can we have a show of hands? Those that are involved in these.
Sorry, hang on. Can I just a suggestion? I mean, is everyone happy to have a show of hands and just? And we've got to respect everyone's decision whether to put a hand up or not, and not look around and see who has and who isn't. But is the room comfortable with doing something like that?
Right. Okay.
What would be a disadvantage of doing it?
It's really hard to get any information out of them, and we keep chasing them. They're really non-committal. There are two particular companies in New Zealand that aren't doing us any favours at all. Do you want me to name them? Fonterra and Silver Fern Farms. Okay, they would be the two worst. They've been quietly selling us out in the background. I don't know if you read The Hound last week. He didn't go as far as I did, but he reported on it, or she. I don't know whether it's a he or she. So. We are definitely being sold out in the background, and it's a shame when your cooperatives are doing it, but I mean, we should be getting used to that by now. But World Economic Forum and UN, certainly, Jasper put me on the spot on this a while ago on radio, but like, I can tell you now that no matter who it is and what it is that's doing it, eventually you have to stand against it. We try and look at what is there in front of us that we can change and put our energies into that, because if we look too far away, we'd not do anything. It would paralyse us. So we'll deal with what we can in front of us, and we need people to do that. If we get enough people, well, maybe we'll take on the UN. But at this stage,
No, I think Bryce answered it quite well at the Lumsden meeting, where we're focusing on the district councils and regional councils and our national government elections, because that's something we can focus on and can put some energy in. And Bryce, you made the comment: how do you change the people in the UN from a little, a little country down in New Zealand? So let's focus from a Groundswell point of view. As we're focusing on what we can change, and what we can change to get the tide turning back in our favour, is to start with the meat companies, the milk companies, our district councils, our industry groups. And so I guess that's all we would say on the UN issue. And I mean, we can get bogged down in that discussion, but we would rather just leave it at that, and yes, focus on. But going back to the question.
Bryce, my apologies for that. We didn't put you on too much of a spot, Dawn and I, on the radio show. But what I want to say is, about 2 years ago, Jamie, you were there at Gore when I asked the question. Logan Evans was chairing that meeting about, and I asked the question, I said, we often don't need our government to do anything to us. We have our own processes doing it to us. And you polled the room and you said, as I asked the question, a murmur went up. That's exactly what's happening. And now and I support you guys. You've put out a boycott for Countdown, pushing Scope 3 emissions. Fonterra is doing the exact same thing to its own shareholders. How many of the people around here have actually emailed Fonterra or have emailed Alliance or Silver Ferns or whatever? I mean, I appreciate you guys doing it, but we have to take some responsibility ourselves here. These guys cannot carry all the load. It's the same thing with the councillors. And now, I mean, I'll speak with my councillor hat on. You can elect anyone you like onto the council, but if you don't hold them accountable, you don't come along to meetings, you don't email, or you don't put pressure on a councillors, regardless of the team you have there around the table, it'll again go to pieces, because, again, there might be a few people around the table who are aware of what's going on. But like I'm 1 out of 12. How many of the people who are being affected by all this legislation come along to council on a Wednesday? You can actually come in, sit, walk, have a coffee, go out at any time you like. The doors are open. But come along. Please make the effort. And please email your own processors. Speak to your relationship managers, be it Fonterra, be it your stock agent, or something about what's happening. We need to be talking a bit more.
We do encourage people to do that, and that does help us if you take some initiative. And we do get emails, particularly emails from our supporters, and they'll CC Groundswell in, and they've sent an email to whether it's the chief of the board of beef and lamb, or whether it's Fonterra, and they've written an email and they'll CC us in. But there are also individuals doing that as well, so that's all part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Look. We'll move on a little bit. Jasper brought up about the Countdown boycott. It is actually going very, very well. And I guess, and I'm sorry, I'm going to come back to the catchment, but just filling in a couple of details here. And it is going very, very well. But that's been done by people as well. And it's not just people of the land. It's city people are right behind it, because they are starting to see the struggles that we're having in rural areas, and they can see the pressure that's coming on food producers. So it's really good to have them. And what we're intending to do is do something about it before elections. And so I'm going to ask something of you people, but Laurie and I are going to drive tractors from Invercargill to Auckland, and we leave on the 21st of September. We arrive in Auckland on the 1st of October, which is the day before special voting opens. I'm not asking you all to come to Auckland, by the way, but we need to get the media's attention. And the way we intend to do that is by having as many people in tractors, preferably, but utes as well, come with us from at least Invercargill to Gore. If you want to go to Balclutha, that's fine. If you want to go to Picton, that's fine. But we want a big turnout so that the media know that something massive is happening. Put that in your diary, 21st of September. On top of that, businessmen in Auckland have hired the Ellerslie race course, and there's going to be a massive rally there on the 1st of October. They have already fronted up with 85,000 for advertising themselves. So we're not alone, not by a long shot. And it's going to be Drive for Change is what we're calling it, because basically we can't stand 3 more years of this government. Yeah, look, it's a mixed bag, eh? What do you do? Look, if you ask people, our committee would be the same. You get the same sort of feeling. So we get a pretty good gauge because we're all varied in our committee and they all have the same suggestions. But it's hard to actually get everybody on the same page. We've got to do something where we're not disadvantaging people, and particularly ourselves, by making ourselves look just like a pack of rebel. I know it could come, okay? It could come. I don't know that we're there yet. We need to change the government, and then if nothing changes, then we've got to take real drastic action, okay? But let's get this government changed, and let's not commit too many people to a whole day or 2 days or 3 or 4 days. That's why we're going to do it right throughout New Zealand. We've got coordinators right throughout New Zealand. There'll be a massive crowd by the time we get to Auckland. We're going to have a policy burning day on the Bombay Hills. So we've got a lot of the nuts and bolts together. So we're asking you to help us by being in Invercargill on the 21st, first thing in the morning. There'll be heaps of social media and emails coming out. While I'm on emails, if we're to help you in the Aparima area, we need you to be registered with us. We need your postcode, right? Doesn't matter about anything else. We need your email address, but we need your postcode because we can target areas on a postcode. So we can keep you all informed of what's happening in your area. If you keep us informed just through your postcode, we can signal you out and get stuff to you personally. So please give us your postcodes. Absolutely crucial. Do we want to? We need to come back to talk about what you people are going to do. I don't know.
That's up to you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have a I mean, you can give us an indication tonight if you want, and we can take that tomorrow and say, look, we've had an indication from a meeting of 140 people,
140, yeah.
And this is what the indication is saying. We can take that to Environment Southland tomorrow, and I mean that would be at least a start. Whether you have, I think you're rather than do it as individuals, you're better to have some sort of collective way to do it. Whether it's you sign a document or a petition. You might have a petition for the Aparima FMU, and it's designed like a petition that everyone can sign, and you just keep sharing it over the next 2 or 3 weeks and explaining what the petition's about, and you just collate signatures from all farmers that are required to do a freshwater farm plan. I don't know, there's different options.
I still think, and what was brought up at Gore the other night about just a registry that you can put your names on, and then you can all see who's on it from your catchment. But rather than have a show of hands, perhaps if we just ask all those to say aye and those against say no, that way nobody's really going to know who said what. But we want something that looks unanimous. So if you're going to say... You're on it?
Okay.
Sorry, I'm getting a bit woke there. Okay. Oh, well, that's pretty unanimous, eh? Why haven't you got your hand up? Just joking. Okay, that's brilliant. We'll take that to Environment Southland, but we still need you to back up on that. And we'll get other farmers around New Zealand to actually add to the list. So once Jamie's gone through Waikato, we'll do exactly the same thing with them, and then we'll build the list around New Zealand. If we can get basically every farmer, individual farmer in New Zealand to sign that, and then so the government really knows what it's up against. As Jamie alluded to before, when you arrive at Parliament with a 102,000 signature petition, they do take notice. They really do. Yeah, no, we'll commit to that. If you ones are committed to take a stand, we'll commit to sorting something so that you can actually be joined together on it.
And there may be some of you in the crowd that are reticent, which is understandable. And I mean, if you want to talk to myself or Edwin or Bryce afterwards, or later at a later time, I mean, you can get our details anywhere. And I mean, it's always a little bit uncomfortable in a meeting. I've been in meetings where I've been the lone voice. You know, when I was on the council, when we were trying to get rid of all the other councillors, and I was the lone voice. So I got used to 3 years of being 2 votes to 8. 2 votes to, you know what it's like, Jaspreet. Yeah, 2 votes to 8. And if you're welcome to talk to any of us. Yeah, and give us ideas. I mean, we want ideas from you guys. Yeah.
On the petition we submitted to the petitions committee, now they don't just let you to go straight to where you're supposed to go, they make sure you pass through committees. It was accepted by the petitions committee, so it is going on to the environmental committee.
Yeah, this is the emissions tax. Petition, the 102,000 signatures. Yeah.
So we will speak to that one too. So they're certainly, and we've got quite a few parliamentarians on our side over that now. That the attitude has really changed in government about emissions. You might have noticed, and I'd have to say that you people played a big part in that. The ones that voted Andrew Morrison off did a major service to New Zealand agriculture. Simply because, and James Shaw has actually come out himself and said this has been ramroded because they voted the chairman of Beef and Lamb off. So they know what an effect it had. So that's you farmers that voted and that did it. Thank you very much. All right, that's a real coup for us. There's not many chairmen that get voted out. So with that, we've got a Dairy NZ election coming up. And we're intending to put people up. At this stage, we've got a North Island guy that's going to stand. He's one of us. He's not happy with what's happening. So we'll be subtly campaigning for him. And we're after another one at least. Jim Vanderpoel hasn't decided whether he's going to carry on or not yet. I hope he gives up before he gets kicked out also. But however many we need, we intend to put up. So if you know of people that would like to do that and are more interested in serving farmers than themselves, then we're interested to hear from them. So we'll be calling on you. Okay, do we want to go anywhere else? Has anybody got anything else they'd like to bring up?
Yeah, so with the SNAs, it's much the same. It's just saying no politely. What we're saying is when you're dealing with council staff, you just be respectful. Like it's very hard in Canterbury at the moment with quite a lot of our clients. You know, they're pretty frustrated, and it's easy to get angry with council staff. But a lot of the time, the council staff are put in a position of implementing a policy that, in some cases, they don't like. But yeah, just say no, and that you are saying no because of the legislation is unworkable. I don't know what Southland, Gore, and Invercargill. I don't know if there's been much done on the SNA front. They've been a bit wiser down here in terms of not being first. Out of the blocks with SNAs. I was just going to make a couple of extra summary points.
Can I just cover off a wee bit more about that? If they notify you they're coming on your farm, definitely talk to your neighbours and get somebody else there with you. If you're going to say they're not allowed on, you need other people there because they may pick a bad day, and you need somebody there to help you to just maybe keep you calm or whatever.
You could also question them. What's the information being used for? What are the protocols around the information? Can you give me a signed, there's different ways to do it. Can you give me a signed assurance that the information cannot be used for, but I mean, at the end of the day, I would just say, are you a public agency? And if they say yes, then I'd say no.
They know our stance on SNAs is that we're advising people to say, no, you cannot come on our property. Okay, we've made that clear to all of them.
We've written to all the councils right throughout New Zealand.
And if we get this motivation going with the Freshwater Farm Plans, we'll let them know exactly the same thing, that the farmers are saying, no, they're not going to do it.
I mean, we're going to shut down the Freshwater Farm Plans, we're going to shut down the SNAs. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We're going to shut down the legislation. Groundswell have put together an alternative solution in terms of all these issues. And Groundswell, you know, we initially started out as a protest movement, And what we've done more recently is we've actually looked at alternative solutions, because there are environmental issues that we need to address. And as farmers, we actually all need to, we need to lift our game, and there are some issues out there we need to address. So what we've done is we've put a concept out there. So I guess follow us for the next couple of months, because we've gone public with that. We'll be doing more on that. You get the Rural Guardian magazine. It's a new farming magazine. Well, it's a South Island wide. They're giving us a column every issue, so they're a monthly issue. They're supporting the Groundswell with a column on. I write that column. The next column is going to explain about the integrated, what we're calling as our solution to all of this environmental legislation. And in a nutshell, we're suggesting that a lot of the stuff to do with SNAs, farm plans, wetlands, all that sort of stuff is done under one framework. At the moment, we've got a whole lot of different policies, regulations, and they're conflicting with each other. But have a read of the Rural Guardian. It'll be next month's issue now. If you want to read about farm plans, look at the last couple of issues of the Rural Guardian. I've explained about farm plans. So I won't go anything more on that integrated or that what we call integrated policy framework. That's a solution we've put forward. I guess in terms of a couple of other points, it's something that I started out with in terms of, you will hear people will say that we're spreading misinformation, and I've already been accused of spreading misinformation, particularly by politicians. I was one of those Pākehā farmers down south spreading misinformation in Northland. Quote James Shaw, and I was the one up there in Northland, but he never actually qualified what misinformation I was spreading. I'm very ruthless on facts and knowing my stuff and having it right, and if I've got it wrong, I admit that I got it wrong. So if anyone says misinformation in Groundswell or Jamie McFadden or Bryce McKenzie in a sentence, then you challenge them, what misinformation exactly you're talking about.
Actually, just to cut in there a minute, and there was the one on the west coast, the area significant to Māori, and we put the actual clipping out on it, got accused of misinformation, which was actually totally wrong. That actually did happen, and only lately they're now claiming it was a misprint. Within the last couple of weeks, have claimed it's a misprint. It's just ridiculous. But they did wrong. They got it completely wrong, and they wouldn't fess up to it.
So I guess just on the last point is that I do a lot of work in the environmental space, so I encourage everyone to look after the environment. I mean, that's still one of the number one. So keep doing the good stuff that you're doing on the farms. Farm plans are a really useful tool in the right context, and so there's industry group models out there. You've got your QE2 trust. There's a lot of good stuff. So let's keep all the good stuff still going, and let's try and reduce the bad stuff. I mean, we don't need any more bad publicity. So be proactive. We're proactive in our district. So if we see farmers doing not good stuff, like particularly around winter grazing, we've had some pretty big winter grazing issues in our district, and we've got a sort of a network amongst us, and people will contact our group, and I'm usually the one that ends up going and talking to the farmer and saying, hey, there's been some concerns raised here. Can we just understand how you're doing this? There's ways, we try and help them to improve what they're doing. So our involvement with Groundswell from North Canterbury perspective, I mean, I'm really positive, and our group in North Canterbury, we've got a couple of hundred members now. We're so positive about the Groundswell campaign in terms of the new voice that it's giving farming, and we're really strong supporters of the Groundswell campaign. So that's a bit of a positive note to finish on.
Thanks, Jamie. Look, there's a couple other little details, and that is you would probably know, most of you, I hope, that we have Groundswell Radio, which is compared by Peter Williams. It's only an hour long, and I can happily say today we secured a sole sponsor of the program, so it's secured, and he's actually an Auckland person, believe it or not, and he's not a farmer. So people do care about getting that message out. And I'll have to say that he directly sponsors it for us. So we're really fortunate for that. But do most of you know how to get a hold of the Groundswell Radio? If you're on our email, you can get it through Spotify. If you've got Spotify, just go into it and search Groundswell and do the interviews on there. Do I do an ad for Reality Check Radio, Jasper?
I've just done one on Groundswell Radio on farm plans. That's the second one I've done. Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting a lot of good feedback. We only have 3 people a week get interviewed. It's about an hour long. Peter Williams does his usual good stuff. He asks the good questions. And also, for us, we'd love you to join our organisation. It doesn't cost you anything. It's www.groundswellnz.co.nz and just join up. You'll get our emails. We put an email out a week. We try and keep them short. We know that, like ourselves, there's not much attention span. So we try and make it interesting and short. And last but not least, I'm going to make a thank you to Jamie. You can easily see why the first time we had him speaking at something we organised, we never let him out of our side after it. And he does that gnarly stuff that none of us like doing. He reads, and he studies. So we're really grateful for Jamie. And I'd like you to put your hands together, please, as a big thank you. Yeah, so as I said, please join Groundswell NZ. And only by people can we get to where we want to be. And it's you, as Jasper put it very well, that you need to motivate yourselves to do it, because it's apathy that's got us into this position. So we need to be active. And I can say that for a fact, because, man, I never expected to be here and didn't want to be. So you've just got to get motivated and do it. Okay, that's about it. Unless anybody has got any last...
Do we as a community need to take away from here tonight, maybe set up a support group or a network somehow, so that if people are presented with SNA challenges and that, they've got a group of people that they can call on that are local and instant? No. Just a thought, just to have, not only for, right, because mental health out there is bad too, so it's just kind of having that support network locally.
That's something that you definitely could look at. I mean, that's what we set up. That's what Rural Advocacy Network is. I mean, we set ourselves up. We were all, at the time we set ourselves up, we were all members of Federated Farmers. But Federated Farmers was missing in action in our province and still is. Your Southland Federated Farmers is actually onto it. It's one of the few branches that is. They're a great bunch of guys and girls in Southland Federated Farmers, but ours are missing in action. But in terms of that support, that's what we've set up now. And so as part of that network of support, you know, farmers come to us for support on all sorts of issues. We've got a very close working relationship with, like I said, the District Council, but also the Rural Support Trust. And we've helped several farmers into other areas that can help them, like the Rural Support Trust, or we've just been able to help them ourselves. So, and just having that support network there is great, because whether you do that in a local context, whether you link that in with Groundswell or not, or keep it independent, is up to you.
I was just going to say that. We've got about 6 or 7 other Groundswell groups throughout New Zealand that are actively got their own Facebook pages. They swipe a lot of stuff off our main page, but they do have their own local content. If you wanted to do something like that, it gives you an umbrella to do it under. And if you're serious about it, get a hold of us, and then we can promote it for you, so get people to join up with you, so that you've got your own group going. They can be very successful. It depends on whoever's basically looking after them. So it doesn't need any committee to do it. Just if one person wants to do it, that's great. It just gives a communication for everybody. Well, the last thing that I neglected to say is, look, Jamie's a volunteer, I'm a volunteer. None of us get paid. But we do have overheads, and there is a donation box at the door. if you like, look, if I was getting paid to do this, I'd never ask you for money, and that's why I feel that I can. We appreciate any donations we can get, and I can guarantee you we spend them on fighting your causes.